and is being live streamed on the MDTA Finance Committee webpage. All members will have their video active during the entirety of the meeting. Minimize background noise during the call. I would ask that everyone on the line please mute your phones except when speaking. I ask that those who are presenting or answering a question to please turn your video and audio on when speaking. When you are done, please turn your video off and put your audio on mute. There are no members of the public, no elected officials, and no media who have pre-registered to comment at this morning's meeting. This time we will begin with agenda item number 1, open meeting approval of the open meeting minutes from October 1st, 2022.
Motion to approve.
We have
Second.
a motion by member Carroll, second by member Rosen. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to agenda item number 2. Deb Sharpless will present the independent auditor's report on the fiscal year 2022 financial statements. Good morning, Deb.
Good morning, members. For the record, my name's Deb Sharpless, MDTA's Chief Financial Officer. This item, in a second, I'm going to turn it over to Sean Walker from Clifton Larson Allen, the independent auditing firm or accounting firm that audited our annual financial statements. So let me just start there and then available for any questions. So Sean, if you would please present your materials.
Welcome, Mr. Walker.
Yeah, thank you very much. You would have, we provided a PowerPoint deck as part of the materials. I'm going to slip through that so we can talk through it. Starting with the agenda page, which is on page 2. First of all, I want to thank you again for the opportunity to serve MDTA as the external auditor again this year. I want to also thank Deb, Ken, Vicky, and Chantel, and the entire team in the finance area that helps put together these financial statements and works with our auditors. It was a good process this year. We also, I thank you for the opportunity to be able to come in front of you and present our results. So first thing, just talking about our team, you know, obviously you're pretty familiar with the MDTA team. I am the principal. I would assign the report. We had a director by the name of Jatana Coleman that did the management of the job, and Josh McLean, which seniored the job. They both were here last year, so it helped in transition to get through the audit. So as part of our audit overview, areas of emphasis that we went through in the audit is obviously in your investments area. We always take a look at additional emphasis over that. This year was interesting. We had to do an implementation of a new leasing standard, GASB 87. So there was a process to go through and identify all the leases and take all, whether they're operating and capitalize them. You'll see that reflected in the financial statements as right to use assets, and for the ones that you are leasing, and then for your leases, you'll see a lease receivable and a deferred inflow put on the financial statements. But we did implement that. It went fairly well. We do look at the long-term debt significantly, the revenue estimate for your unbilled tolling activity as usual. We did have a change in terminology, more so than the way that things are treated. As part of the implementation of the GASB 87 lease standard, the direct financing lease was recaptioned. As we looked into it, it doesn't really have the characteristics of leases from an accounting standpoint. It's more of an intergovernmental financing arrangement with the, oh, Deb, I'm forgetting, is it at the airport? I think that with the airport.
Primarily the airport and Department of General Services.
So that was just recaptioned because it's really more like a traditional financing arrangement. And then also, obviously how we put the financials and financial reporting. We were able to issue an unmodified opinion, which is the cleanest opinion, which is the highest level of assurance that an external CPA firm can give, to say that the financial statements that were presented to you are materially accurate, and can be relied upon. Moving into the internal controls, as part of our audit, we do identify key controls and do some tests of internal controls. As part of our evaluation of internal control, as part of the audit, we did not identify any material weaknesses or significant deficiencies that we needed to report to you. So that's good news as well. Few required communication. The accounting policies are consistent with prior year, other than the adoption of that GASB 87. The accounting estimates, some of the ones that we just have to draw your attention to. We do look at estimates, and we do understand how they are put together, and we do concur with the way that management has put together these estimates. And we do feel that the estimates are reasonable, but drawing your attention to the significant estimates within the financial statements is the allowance for receivables, allowance on the receivables, the unbilled tolling revenue, pollution remediation liability, the capital asset depreciation, and also the pension liabilities, which those liabilities are actually determined through an actuarial study and then distributed to MDTA through GAD. We didn't have any difficulties encountered in performing the audit. Uncorrected misstatements, we didn't have any uncorrected misstatements or corrected misstatements that were done throughout the year. Management was able to prepare all of their own journal entries and post those. We didn't have any disagreements with management. We don't believe that they consulted with any other auditor prior to engaging with us. And then significant issues discussed with management prior to retention, we did not have any. And we did receive a representation letter from management. And I think that is usually provided as part of your governance communication that you may have received in your packet. Future considerations. The GASB is never quiet. There will be some new standards coming in. We do not believe that any of these will significantly impact the financial statements MDTA, so I won't go into great detail on them. The two that have probably the most likelihood is your GASB number 94, which deals with your P3 arrangements or your private part, public-private, public partnerships. Basically, when you start creating a lot of agreements, that there is, and these aren't service concession agreements. That's a different thing. These are actually like, your typical P3s that you may hear. And then also on the GASB 96 subscription-based information technology, which is being called SBITA. It's basically the same type of standard we did for the leasing, just that it's focused on long-term agreements related to software. GASB just wants to make sure all the obligations that people sign contracts for are hanging up in the balance sheet. And then these other two are out a little ways, and one's just correcting error of the omnibus, and then the correct of various standards. I don't believe there will be an impact to MDTA, and then the calculation of how compensated absences will be addressed in 101. So other than that, I'll stand for any questions that the committee may have, and I do appreciate your time. Yeah, Jeff.
So just one quick question. So last year, it was noted that the change to the toll service providers was one of the difficulties, and this was, of course, our first full year with the new vendors. Just wanted to make sure that everything went well and clean there. But I assume the fact that you didn't note it did.
Yeah, that is correct. I mean, obviously, with we're a year later, and you know that a lot of the tolls have been processed, and because the vendor was in place for the whole year and things were caught up, it was a lot better.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. All in all, a good report, a good audit. Mr. Walker, thank you and your team for your help with this. Thank you, Deb. We appreciate the update.
Thank you.
We will now move on to agenda item number 3, contract J01B3600006, open text additional licenses. And Deborah Stewart will present that item.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Deborah
Good morning.
Stewart. I am an Assistant Director of Information Technology, and I am presenting J01B3600006 Open Text Additional Licenses. This contract is the provision of additional open text user licenses and 3 years of open text maintenance and support for those licenses. This platform is our document workflow management system. We use it for our procurement card log processing and approval, invoice tracking and approval, and task order management for the Office of Engineering and Construction, as well as allowing for upcoming storage for our police scanning files effort. The additional licenses and the continued software maintenance and support will allow us to maintain our current systems and continue the use of OpenText software, as well as to access technical support as needed. This contract was procured as a software business reserve purchase order request for proposal under functional areas 1 and 3 of the Department of Information Technology's commercial off-the-shelf software contract. This was advertised on August 17th, 2022. Bids were received on September the 15th, 2022. There were 3 bids received. The low bid was submitted by Digital Information Services firm in the amount of $305,858.95. We are recommending award of this contract to Digital Information Services. The bid price was 4.4% below the engineer's estimate of $320,000. There were no bid protests or rejections, and this was a small business reserve contract with no MBE goals. Notice to proceed is anticipated for March 1st, 2023, and we're asking for recommended approval to take to full authority board. I would be happy to take any questions on this item.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any questions from any of the members?
Make a motion that we approve this contract.
Okay,
Request.
thank you. You have a motion, is the second?
Member Ardinger, I'll second.
Thank you, Member Ardinger. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Deb, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will move on to agenda item number 4, contract MT 31540000, fire alarm maintenance. Tina Dorn is here to present. Good morning, Tina.
Yes. Good morning. I was trying to get my mic together. Okay. Good morning. My name is Tina Dorn. I work in the Division of Operations or Operations Division, and I am here to seek recommended approval to present MT 31540000 to the full MDTA board for the award of the fire alarm and suppression preventive maintenance and repair and fire alarm monitoring for MDTA facilities. This contract will service 9 facilities: William Preston Lane Bridge, Baltimore Harbor Tunnel, Fort McHenry Tunnel, Francis Scott Key Bridge, Point Breeze Headquarters, Intercounty Connector, Harry William Nice Memorial Bridge, Thomas J. Hatem Bridge, and John F. Kennedy Highway. The scope includes fire alarm and suppression, preventive maintenance and repair, and fire alarm monitoring services for all fire alarm and suppression mechanical components, MDTA wide. The budget fund cert amount is $850,000. The IFB was advertised on July 26, 2022, and bids were received on September the 20th, 2022, and October the 4th, 2022. We received 4 bids: Advanced Fire Protection Systems, Blaze Guard Commercial Services, SA Communal Company, and ADT Commercial. The apparent low bidder is Advanced Fire Protection Systems LLC for $1,340,010. And we are recommending award of this contract to Advanced Fire Protection. There are no MBE goals, sub-goals, or SBR designation. This is a prior work history. Advanced does have prior work history with MDTA. NDTP is anticipated on December 7th, and the current contractor for fire alarm and suppression will expire on December the 31st, 2022. The contract is necessary for the fire alarm equipment maintenance and repair and fire alarm monitoring at MDTA facilities in order to keep them operational and in compliance. And again, I'm seeking recommended approval to present this contract to the full MDTA board.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Jeff?
So just 2 questions. One is, was there an engineer's estimate for this? And the second question is, did we confirm the scope of work? It's a pretty wide range with the bids. So I just want to make sure that the low bidder has an adequate scope of work.
Yes, the low bidder does have adequate scope of work. Matter of fact, Advanced Fire is the current contractor for this contract. So they are very familiar with the scope of work. And as far as the estimated, what you call it, engineer estimate, what we do is really go by the amount of invoices received, paid, and we add on escalation to get an idea of what the budget amount would be. And even currently, they have not gone over the budget amount. So we are within range to ensure that we don't go over budget.
Thank you, Tina.
You're welcome.
Very good question. Any other questions?
This is Member Ardinger. I did have a question. Obviously, this is an ongoing expense that we incur every 3 years. What was, and I think I understand that you said we have been using Advanced Fire Protection System. What was the cost over the prior 3 years, and did it cover all the same facilities?
For the prior 3 years, I would really have to get back with you on that, but thus far, we've only spent about $500,000. And the estimate then, the budget, the fund cert was about $1 million point something. So we lowered it because based on, again, the invoice we received. So I believe I would have to really get back with you to give you the exact amount, but thus far, and they've been with us for 5 years, we've only spent about $500,000.
Thank you. Do you know, did it cover all the same facilities as?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All the facilities. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
So do I have to follow up still?
No, you're fine. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah,
Okay.
we are within budget.
Good question. Thank you, Member Ardinger. Any other questions? Okay. Is there a motion to advance this item to the full board for further consideration?
So moved. Carroll.
Thank you, Member Carroll. We have a motion. Is there a second?
Member Ardinger, I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Member Ardinger. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. I mean, opposed, I'm sorry. Looked like I heard three voices, but I'll just say, anyone opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. And thank you for your presentation, Deb. Tina.
No problem.
Okay. We will move on to agenda item number 5, traffic and revenue forecast update. Chantel and Kelly. Good morning, Chantel and Kelly. Hey there, you may be on mute. Sorry.
Oh, good morning. Sorry about that. You're
Sure.
correct. Great. Good morning. For the record, I am Chantel Green, Director of Finance here at the Authority. Today, I'll be discussing some of the highlights from the most recent annual traffic and revenue report that was prepared by the independent traffic and revenue consultant, CDM Smith. Please note that today I'm also joined by Kelly Morrison from CDM Smith. Kelly is a transportation planner and one of the key members of the CDM Smith Traffic and Revenue Consultant team. I will begin the presentation by providing the committee with a big picture view of the most recent TNR update, and Kelly will delve into some of the more intricate traffic and revenue assumption details. Enclosed within your materials, you'll find a summary memo, a copy of the annual TNR report, and a presentation that outlines some of the main highlights from the most recent annual TNR forecast update. For purposes of today's presentation, I'd like to direct your attention to the presentation document that begins on page 40 of your PDF materials. So we will now turn to slide 2, which is actually on page 41 of your materials. You'll note that system-wide, the updated TNR forecast reflects a 31 million or 1% decline over the fiscal year 2023 to 2028 timeframe. This decline is due in part to the lingering impacts of COVID-19 as well as the customer assistance plan. If you turn to the next slide, slide 3, system-wide, in-lane toll and administrative revenues are expected to decline by about 50 million over the 2022 to 2028 timeframe. Turning to slide 4, approximately 12 million or 23% of the reduction over this timeframe is projected to occur on the agency's legacy facilities. If you turn to slide 5, approximately 30 million or 59% of the system-wide decline in revenues is forecasted to occur on the ICC and I-95 ETL facilities. And turning to slide 6, approximately 9 million or 17% of the system-wide decline in revenues is due to reduced administrative toll revenues. Turning to slide 7, when considering forecasted revenue collectively, over the fiscal year 2022 to 2028 forecast period, the majority of the revenue collected is projected to occur on the authority's legacy facilities. And then if you turn to slide 8, when taking a deeper look at the in-lane revenue projections for our legacy facilities over the forecast period, approximately 61% of the revenues comprise passenger vehicle revenue. And then turning to slide 9, when considering forecasted near-term in-lane revenue for the legacy facilities, for both passenger vehicles and commercial vehicles, Easy Pass revenues are projected to significantly exceed video toll revenue collections. So with that, that's sort of a big picture overview. I am now going to turn it on over to Kelly Morrison from CDM Smith, and Kelly will walk you through some of the key forecast assumptions that drive these figures.
Thank you, Chantel. Hi, everyone. As she introduced me earlier, I am Kelly Morrison from CDM Smith. I've been the lead analyst and task manager on the annual forecast update for the past few years. We're going to dive into slide 10, which talks about the key forecast assumptions, and this is really highlighting what we changed since last year's forecast. The first important part to highlight is obviously COVID-19 has impacted commuting trends and travel, and we're still seeing some impacts to this day, 2 years later after the start of the pandemic. particularly on our congestion-priced and commuter-based facilities, which for you pertains mostly to the ICC and the I-95 ETLs. So looking at the chart on the left side of slide 10, the gray and the green lines at the lower end hovering around 10% in the recent months is the ICC and the ETLs. In particular, and this goes for other toll facilities across the country and in the region, we're seeing the AM peak period really hasn't returned, which is from telecommuting trends, working from home, and how that has impacted home-based work trips. We are seeing some return in the PM peak and on the weekends, but it is not quite enough to make up for the declines that we're seeing in the AM. For the legacy facility, particularly the harbor crossings and the I-95 JFK are performing better than we're seeing on some of the more local resident-based facilities. And trucks especially have been outperforming what we anticipated from COVID recovery and continues to perform quite well. So in this forecast, we did not make any adjustments to trucks. We did make some adjustments to the legacy PCs on the Haddam, Nice Bridge, and the Bay Bridge. And then for the ICC and the ETLs, we did assume a much slower recovery to account for those telecommuting trends that are still ongoing. Another big component of change in this forecast was the customer assistance plan, which was not announced or assumed in last year's forecast update, which this obviously had revenue impacts for both fiscal 2022 and will impact fiscal 2023. So due to this, we needed to account for that in both the backlog video transactions and the ongoing video transactions and the civil penalty collections. With the plan ending at the end of November, we did have to account for this and assume more video collections and civil penalty revenue collections will occur in the second half of fiscal year 2023. Moving farther down the line, we have the 3G enhancements. We had assumed that the new vehicle classifications, which are the new motorcycle rates in class 3A and B and 4A and B, pertaining to 3 and 4 axles with trailers, those are new toll rates that we had assumed would occur in fiscal 2022, which are now occurring in fiscal 2023. And the last change, which also had a bit of impact within the intermediate years of the forecast, is updates to the construction schedule. We did get an updated list from the Office of Engineering and Construction with the latest trends and schedules for the construction projects, with the largest being the FSK and BHD. So Francis Scott Key and Baltimore Harbor Tunnel have the AET conversion for the Harbor Tunnel, and then the Bear Creek and Curtis Creek span projects. Moving on to the next slide, which is slide 11, we're going to get into the detail on a facility grouping basis. The first section we'll look at just on a total, the in-lane and administrative toll revenue. As Chantel said, we're about $50 million down from last year's forecast. Primarily from COVID, a big part is from the ICC and the ETLs, but also the traffic diversion from the construction. If we look at the legacy facility in particular, it's $12 million. The trucks, once again, are outperforming and doing quite well, which I think benefits the legacy facility because even though they are a smaller share of the total traffic, they contribute a large share of the revenue. And that has been a positive, and we're seeing that also on other facilities. I think the e-commerce trends have been helping toll roads where, we're seeing the trucks aren't nearly as impacted while the cars are showing some remnant impact of COVID. We are anticipating that the commercial vehicle overperformance could taper off in a couple of years, but we have not assumed a drastic drop in the levels of trucks that we're seeing currently. If we move on to slide 12, we can look at the ICC and the ETLs. These are $30 million worth of the $50 million decrease in the forecast since last year. The ICC in particular, we did drop. The I-95 ETLs, we are seeing some traffic on the weekends, which does benefit it, but because the ICC was mostly used as a congestion-based facility and commuting-wise, we are seeing higher impacts there. So we did account for that and, rebalance our COVID impacts to account for actual trends that we were seeing. For the I-95 ETLs, the extension starting in fiscal year 2026 does provide some benefit. In addition, we did assume the I-695 direct connectors to the northbound direction, which was not assumed last year. That does occur in fiscal 2028. So as you can see in the chart, where the two forecasts start to align, it's because you're getting a positive increase of both transactions and revenue from those direct connectors. Obviously, that's new traffic that would have not been able to access the express lanes before, so that does provide a benefit to the ETL system. The last piece is the administrative toll revenue. So this encompasses Easy Pass related plans, both the Haddam plan, Easy Pass for the trucks, as well as the big component civil penalties, which has been impacted by the customer assistance plan, as we said. When there's no civil penalties being collected, it does cause a decrease in the administrative toll revenue. But as I said earlier, we're assuming, particularly starting January in the second half of fiscal year 2023, that you will begin collecting civil penalties again. So for the remainder of the forecast, the other revenue or administrative toll revenue remains fairly close to last year's forecast. The last slide for me, slide 13, is kind of a roundabout summary of all the detail that we just discussed. So the decline in revenue across the whole entire period from fiscal 2023 through the end 2031 is $41 million down. When you look at it on individual year basis, the fiscal 23 is the one that's most impacted because of the customer assistance plan. A lot of the intermediate years that you see fluctuate, some are up, some are down compared to last year. That's largely due to the construction projects. Some schedules were compressed while others were deferred to different years, so it causes some variability in individual years. On an overall basis, the forecast is not largely different than what was produced last year, rather than re-benchmarking to actual experience that we've seen and accounting for these construction changes. Some uncertainty does remain, obviously, with any forecast. It's based on a set of assumptions. Any deviation from those assumptions could cause some variation. So these are things, like the teleworking. We don't imagine there being a large increase and a big boom of people going back into the office, but it's something we're monitoring. Is this going to be a long-term trend? Will teleworking increase in the future? And it's something just with all of our facilities we've been collecting data and information on. There's also the economic conditions at the time that we performed this forecast. Obviously, gas prices were skyrocketing and luckily have tapered a bit. But we all know the current economic conditions, now they cause some uncertainty. We did not account for any sort of large downturns in this forecast. We always try to forecast what we believe is the best case scenario or most likely case scenario. So while we did include a little bit of lack of COVID recovery in the near term because of economic conditions, it's something that we do continue to monitor and look at the daily traffic trends to be sure that things are going accordingly. At this point, that is all I have to present, but would love to take any questions if any members have any.
Okay, thank you. Any questions?
Member Ardinger, I did have a question. I think you answered this, but I want to make sure I understand this. So in your assumptions for the forecast, particularly as to commuter habits, is the assumption that over time it will come back to what it was pre-COVID, or is it with the assumption that it will always be somewhat diminished from that time prior to COVID?
Yeah, so we do have a small tapering in the next few years, but we do assume a long-term trend. I want to say it's 2.5% for the whole system. I can get back to you on the specifics because I think we do have a different assumption for the bridge tunnels and the bridges and tunnels versus the ICC and the ETLs. But it is a small assumption that, a certain percent of commuters will not come back fully.
Okay.
And that was embedded in last year's forecast, but I think, we just adjusted it slightly based on recent trends.
Okay. And then with truck traffic, the assumption is that we are back to pre-COVID and that it will remain that way?
Currently, right now, yes, you are back to even slightly above pre-COVID levels. The growth in the past few years was higher than what we would assume. And I should have pointed this out. So the chart that I show on slide 10, the way we calculate those estimates is that's an estimate of what we assume would have been currently. So if it's showing that the trucks are, say 5 to 10% above high, that's 5 to 10% above what we thought it would be for that particular month. It's not compared to pre-pandemic levels. It's compared to an estimate of if COVID were not to happen. So based on what we were assuming normal truck growth was, the trucks are outperforming that measure right now. And that's what we assume will not last forever. We don't think it's going to grow by 5-10%. We think it'll return back to a more normal trend within a few years.
Great. Thank you.
Member
Member
Carl.
Ardinger, if I could, Chair, this is Will Pines for the record, Executive Director for MDTA. I just want to add to that, whenever we do any kind of traffic analysis, you develop these kinds of assumptions, compounding growth, linear growth. You can kind of look at it in different ways. There's sort of a range of reasonableness on that. With traffic and revenue for financial purposes, we don't want to overstate potential revenue. And so we tend to be a little bit conservative with our growth assumptions when it comes to financial traffic projections. And for engineering and design, the opposite is true, that you don't want to design a roadway and have the traffic grow a lot more. So you tend to be conservative a little bit in the other direction. So I just want to be clear that when it comes to these assumptions, there's a range of potential growth that can occur. And, for the financial purposes, we try to be a little conservative in the assumptions there.
Thank you. That seems wise.
And I agree with Walt, and that's why, with Will, because we also won't want to assume, 5% growth on trucks. It's unheard of, and we obviously have data for your system back to the 80s, and growth of that sort would not be what's considered normal growth. So that's why within our forecast, we have our normal growth, and then we're layering on the COVID impacts on top of that, because we're looking at them as independent variables that are built within the forecast.
Great. Member Carroll, do you have a question?
Maybe just to piggyback a little bit on his comments and suggest perhaps for the entirety of the understanding, I'd like to get that clarity on how modeling works, particularly around assumptions made post-pandemic traffic. I just don't, and maybe you're saying it in a way that I'm just not receiving it, but I'm just not clear how you can, within a degree of reasonableness, predict traffic factoring in a pandemic forward, because we've never had a pandemic that we can model time or around, right? So maybe there's just a modeling exercise that you could walk the board at some point, certainly not today, but just so that we have an understanding of what that methodology is.
Sure, yeah, I would love to do that. Yeah, since the pandemic started, I've been tracking it not only for Maryland, but for multiple states for our agency. And so when we're predicting these trends, it's typically not based on just what's happening in Maryland. It's based on other Northeast states and East Coast states that are having very similar trends to what you guys are seeing. So it's not just us saying, oh, well, this went down by 5%, so let's keep it there. Just with any sort of trend analysis, we pull together all the information we can and come up with something that, as you said, is an assumption. When the Omicron variant hit, we were not planning for that, right? We were being conservative, but that caused people to stay home in a larger amount than what we had predicted. So in the beginning of the pandemic, it was something that was changing month to month, and we were tracking month to month. Whereas now, if you look at the chart since the summer or the fall of last year, there are some dips here and there, but you're kind of at a flat line where we're assuming, okay, well, this is a fairly stable trend. We don't have any events or things we know about that could cause a big change. The vaccine caused big changes. The ends of stay-at-home orders, these types of mandates in the beginning caused these big recovery bumps, whereas now we don't have that. But if you guys would like to have a walkthrough of how we did that, I would love to do that.
And Kelly, for now, just to be brief, really brief at this point, and we'll follow up some more. If you would speak for a minute, the update that you did where you basically do a regression analysis with economic factors and our traffic that you can correlate.
Sure. Yeah, so the basis of our forecast is an econometric model. So we have an in-house economist who, with my help, we came up with the data by each facility, each of the 7 legacy facilities, back to the 80s. And he comes up with trend analyses based on this. So I tell him when there was a toll change, when you went from like 1 to 2-way tolling, for example, when a large construction project was happening. And we gathered these from the annual reports and financial reports from the 80s, 90s. And then obviously we have more detailed data recently from Cheryl and Walt. And the economist uses that and comes up with equations to then estimate the what we call baseline growth for each individual system. And this is based on, over 20 years of data. Obviously, you are a long-term legacy facility and your growth trends have, with the exclusion of COVID, been fairly stable, that we can come up with a regression equation that we feel best fits the system. And then we use that as a starting point that feeds in as what we call the baseline growth to the forecast. So each individual facility will have its own growth assumption that then is used to forecast out the future year TNR.
Yeah.
And that would be, excluding construction impacts, COVID, anything that's considered atypical or, would need its own variable. Just that's how we come up with that base growth. And it is detailed in our annual report in chapter 3. And it has a bit more detail in there if you're interested in that.
So we think that's a plus because we have very, very strong correlations that can be shown over history. And so when some economic factor is changing, our traffic becomes very predictable. And so we'll provide additional information regarding that. Member Von Paris, unless there's any other questions, I want to kind of leave with 2 thoughts. The first one is a lot of times we're asked, are we back to pre-COVID levels? And when the question's asked in that manner, how we answer the question is, you literally take what was your traffic volume and what was your revenue as of that date, and then you compare it to today. But as Kelly said on slide 10, that's not what's being done because traffic grows, right? So if technically, and we are, if we only compared to 2019, that doesn't account for the growth that was assumed in traffic and revenue from 2019 to today. So the graph on slide 10 accounts for that growth. So I think that's a really important point, particularly like the ICC and the ETLs. Also, that's not a comparison to, what was the traffic back then. It's accounting for that assumed growth we previously had in the forecast. And the last point is we've asked CDM Smith to always give us a realistic forecast, not one that's haircut and we're guaranteed to exceed and not one that's really ambitious. It's realistic, forecast as to where you believe we are going to be. And we accept that a good forecast can be plus or minus 5%. We've historically have been well within that. And that way we're making adjustments and we have contingencies should traffic and revenue be down 5% or over, because otherwise we get in a situation that if CDM Smith is haircutting revenue and then we turn around and haircut revenue and somebody else haircuts revenue, we're no longer working with realistic numbers. So we ask them to do a realistic forecast and then we make the adjustments to make sure that we can manage within our financial standards.
I certainly agree with that. I do have a comment as it relates to the trucking side of this. There's I guess you could call it a price point where diesel fuel gets to a certain level. Certainly the energy costs have gone up across the board, and diesel fuel in particular continues to rise. Most recently, it went up again. But there comes a time, it hits a price point where shippers and those contract trucking organizations shift from motor carrier to intermodal or train, use of the train. And we're, to move their freight by rail instead of by trucking it. So I guess you're taking a look at that as well, the people that are looking at the economic side of this and evaluating it. And I agree. I mean, being realistic is important. I think also your comments about the trucking, the growth in the trucking are on point. The trucking's kind of propped up now with just-in-time deliveries and online is very strong purchasing. So, but I do think that it'll come a point if diesel fuel keeps rising, a lot will go by rail.
Yeah.
So they're my comments on it. But anyway, are there any other comments? And this is an update, of course, but are there any other comments from anybody? I think I also remember Carol mentioned modeling. I would like to see how that is done, if I can, how the modeling has been, but how you do that. So anyway, if not, if there are no other comments, we thank you both for the update, and we will move on to the next agenda item.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Deb. We will go to agenda item number 6, fiscal year 2024 preliminary operating budget. Jeffrey Brown will present. Good morning, Jeffrey. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. For the record, my name is Jeffrey Brown, Budget Director for the MDTA, and I'm here today to advise you for approval of the preliminary fiscal year 2024 operating budget. The proposed operating budget is $391.4 million, which is $4.2 million or 1.1% increase versus the fiscal year 23 budget. When comparing the fiscal year 24 budget, preliminary budget, to the MDTA approved financial forecast of June 2022, the budget is $4.5 million or 1.2% more than projected. The key driver for this increase is the mandatory 4.5% COLA for all state employees effective on November 1st. In looking at this budget, we typically break it into 3 major categories: mandated increases, discretionary additions, and discretionary reductions. For the mandated increases, the increase was $13.8 million, and this was primarily due to personnel expenses around the COLA. For instance, the 4.5% COLA for the employees just mentioned, plus a 5% COLA for police in fiscal, excuse me, in fiscal 2024 account for $8.4 million of the increase. Also, at the authority of the MDOT secretary, the MDTA follows suit with any actions taken by DBM for all other state employees. In addition, excuse me, the COLA and the increase in personnel expenses resulted in increases in retirement costs of $3.4 million for both civilian and police. There were step and grade changes, which accounted for $1 million, plus Social Security increased $1 million, primarily due to the increased salaries. Moving on to additional discretionary spending, that represented an $8.9 million increase, and there were 3 major areas where that increase occurred. It was in engineering, building repairs and maintenance, and in turnover. Engineering had a $3.0 million increase. This is due to on-call consultant salary and inspection cost increases, plus aligning the budget with actual cost design activity and increased environmental asset construction. For road repairs and maintenance, it was a $2.2 million increase. This is more in line with normal operations for this object pre-pandemic levels. Turnover was decreased. This was essentially a smaller credit, which is a larger expense of $1.6 million. This is the effect of higher salaries offset by the reduction in the turnover rate as we continue to fill vacancies. Management and consultants, 821, had an increase of $0.7 million. This was for various areas such as architectural and engineering contracts for asset management and support services. There were also some additional studies such as workforce optimization modeling and a customer experience mapping that accounts for this increase. Salt and snow had an increase of 0.3 million. This is putting it more in line with what we would expect a normal winter to look like. Insurance payments increased 0.2 million because of the increasing rates in the market. Maryland State Police had a 0.2 million increase, primarily due to overhead rate applied to the COLA increases. And then the remaining increases of 700,000 are spread across various objects like vehicle maintenance, replacement maintenance, and building equipment, and various other areas. They all were about 100,000 increase across all those, and there were increases due to things like diesel costs, association dues, audit increases, things of that nature. Moving on to the reductions, the reductions accounted for an $18.5 million reduction. And really, two major areas account for that. It's number one is the Easy Pass Service Center costs had a reduction of 11.2 million. This decrease occurs due to the expected removal of the backlog, reduced staffing requirements, and the expected lower contractual rates going forward. Purchased vehicles, 0701 decreased 4.5 million. This is a return to more normal operations, as in fiscal 23 we will have finished the purchasing of the collective bargaining vehicles that we had to purchase for the police in that year. Miscellaneous payroll adjustments reduced 1.3 million. This is due to the elimination of a COVID premium pay. Other replacement equipment was lower by 0.6 million. This was the purchase of the PPE equipment, which is to be completed in fiscal year 23. So we expect lower spending going forward, as they typically have a 10-year life. Additional maintenance and equipment was reduced 0.4 million. Some key purchases occurred in the prior fiscal year, so we don't expect to have as much spending needed there. Additional software maintenance is lower by 0.3 million. There were some cost savings as we moved from contractual employees to regular permanent employees, and advertising was lower by 0.2 million as the contract focused solely on extending for time only and not any additional funds. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to take any questions at this time.
Questions?
Just one question. Aside from the COLA, which I understand represents a significant portion of the budget increase, I was a little surprised that we don't have more increases in the other non-labor areas, just given what's happening in the economy and inflation. So just curious your thoughts on what we're seeing.
I do think there was accounting. Yeah, I mean, I think things like, increased diesel costs, costs of that nature. Those are kind of embedded, but I think what you have is some of the major decreases are kind of overshadowing that, like with Easy Pass Service Center costs. But there were some increases in things like I just mentioned, diesel costs, but that was accounting, at least at this point, for 100,000. I'm trying to think of some other areas that happened. But if you can see, as you go through, a lot of this is timing in terms of a lot of major purchases were occurring basically this year. PPE equipment, there was the COVID pay, premium pay, things of that nature that occurred earlier that are going away, which is kind of driving a lot of the decreases. But in terms of the other increases, we do see some of that, but just, I guess, not to the amount that you were expecting.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions, is there a motion to advance this item to the full board for consideration?
So moved.
We have a motion, a second.
Second.
Thank you, Member Carroll. Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Jeffrey, thank you very much for all the good work you do.
All right, thank you.
We'll move on to agenda item number 7, fiscal year 2023 through 2028 Consolidated Transportation Program. Jeannie Marriott is here to present. Good morning, Jeannie.
Good morning. I'm Jeannie Marriott, the Capital Program Manager, and I'm here to seek your recommendation for approval of the proposed fiscal year 23 to 28 final CTP. The final CTP was recommended for approval by the Capital Committee on November 3rd, and with your recommendation today, will be presented to the full board for final approval on November 17th. The 6-year fiscal year 23 to 28 budget in the proposed CTP is $2.7 billion. The proposed CTP reflects a net increase in the 6-year budget of $52.6 million. If we turn to attachment number 1, we can see a breakdown of those changes. The CTP comparison tables, final versus draft, fiscal year 23 to 28 CTP. And I'll be referring to the highlighted numbers in the total 23 to 28 column. In the first line, the Nice Middleton Bridge, we see that there was an increase of $15.8 million. Second line, the I-95 ETL Northern Extension, there was an increase of $9.2 million. The third line, the remainder of the CTP, an increase of $107.9 million. Line 4 is the reserves, allocated and unallocated, and there was an $80.3 million decrease. Line 5 is the remainder of the CTP, including the reserves, which is a $27.6 million increase. That brings us to the total in line 6. For the 6-year period, there was a $52.6 million increase. Now, if we look to the left over in the 2022 column, we see that there was $52.4 million of funds that we anticipated spending in fiscal year 22 that rolled over into the fiscal year 23 to 28 period, which practically offsets the whole increase of the $52.6 million. If we go to attachment number 2, you can see a breakdown of the changes by project. In the first section, there were 4 new projects added, 1 enhancement and 3 system preservation for an increase of $6.3 million. There were 2 projects modified to reflect bids received for a net increase of $15.9 million. There were 2 projects modified to add the construction phase for a net increase of $45.7 million. There was 1 project completed and 1 project deleted for a net decrease of $15 million. And starting on this page and continuing to page 4 are 112 active projects modified due to cost changes and cash flow adjustments. If we go to page 4, we see that there was a net increase of $80.1 million for those projects. That includes cash adjustments. I seem to have misplaced my next page. Okay, here it is. And then if we look at page 5 attachment number 2, the first section is the reserves. It shows that the reserve for the enhancement projects decreased by $51.5 million, and the system preservation projects reserve decreased by $28.8 million for a net decrease of $80.3 million. And then in the last section is a summary of the changes from the draft to the final. First, we see that the projects, which is the total of all the changes that you saw on pages 1 through 4, there was an increase of $132.9 million, and the reserves, a decrease of $80.3 million, which gives us to a net change of $52.6 million for the 6-year period. We go to attachment number 4, we see that there's a pie chart that shows the breakdown of the budget by facility. The Kennedy Highway facility is the largest at 40% because it holds the most of the I-95 ETL Northern Extension projects. Then in attachment 4, in the categories of projects, safety and capacity improvements is the largest, also because it includes a lot of the I-95 ETL Northern Extension projects are classified as safety and capacity improvements. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay. All right, thank you, Jeannie. Is there a motion to advance this item to the full board for further consideration?
Member Ardinger also moved.
Thank you, Member Erdinger. Is there a second?
Second, Member Carroll.
Thank you, Member Carroll. Is there any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Jeannie, thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay. We are moving on to the next agenda item. Fiscal year 2023 through 2028 fiscal financial forecast, approval of the 6-year financial forecast. Chantel Green will present. Good morning, Chantel.
Morning again. Again, Chantel Green, Director of Finance for the record. I am here to present the fiscal year 2023 to 2028 financial forecast for your approval. You'll note that throughout the forecast period, the authority complies with all of its financial goals and legal standards, and that no toll increases are needed in the near term. The primary differences between the June 2022 forecast, and the forecast that is before you today are outlined beginning on page 2. First, there is a $33.2 million reduction in revenue throughout the forecast period. The decline in revenue is primarily due to a reduction in the anticipated toll revenues over the forecast period. Next, the operating budget expenses increased by $26 million throughout the forecast period, mostly due to salary increases that are effective November 1st that are compounded in future years throughout the forecast. Thirdly, capital expenses remain flat throughout the forecast period. As Jeannie noted, the projected increase is due to the rollover of unspent funds from fiscal year 2022 into future fiscal years. And lastly, bond issuances increased by $36 million over the forecast period. And this is due to a decline in net revenues, which results in less PAYGO or cash funding available for capital spending. And those comprise the major changes throughout the forecast period. I'd be happy to respond to any questions. Thank you.
Chantel, just one question related to the increased debt issuances. Presumably, we factored in higher interest costs associated with those debt issuances as well, given the current environment.
Yes, we do utilize a conservative interest rate in our model. Currently, we forecast at 4% generally, and our debt issuances are traditionally well below that. So we do feel like we do have a lot of conservatism built into the model for future debt issuances.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay. Is there a motion to advance this item to the full board for consideration?
So moved.
Okay, we have a motion second.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chantel.
Thank you.
Okay, you're still up, of course, Chantel, right? So
Yes,
we're going to have an update on biannual revenue, a review of revenue sufficiency. So here we go.
Thank you. Thank you. This item is typically pretty short since it follows the financial forecast. The authority's board operating policy requires a biannual review of revenue sufficiency to determine if current rate and fee levels are appropriate based on levels of expected spending. The financial forecast that was just presented shows that the current toll rates, fees, and discounts provide enough revenue in the near term to meet forecasted spending and all legal and policy requirements. And with that, that completes my update. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate all you do, Chantel. Okay, we will move on to agenda item number 10, customer assistance plan update. Deb Sharpless and Will Pines will present. Morning again.
Morning again. Thank you. The purpose of this item is to provide an update on the customer assistance plan. I'll briefly mention each key takeaway, recognizing this presentation will address each key takeaway in greater detail. First, the plan immediately resulted in improved customer service, and collectively, a significant dollar amount of civil penalties was waived through the program. Second, outreach was extensive. Third, as of October month end, 180 million in civil penalties were waived, benefiting nearly 700,000 drivers and businesses. Fourth, roughly 1.9 million drivers and/or businesses have chosen to not pay their debt, which leads to the fifth and final key takeaway. Many customers will not pay unless coupled with enforcement and consequences, which are unfortunate but necessary to be fair to the vast majority of our customers who pay their tolls. Moving to the summary section of your materials. The board approved the customer assistance plan at its February board meeting for the period of February 24th, 2022 through November 30th, 2022, a 9-month period. The plan entailed 4 elements. The first element targeted reducing call and web chat wait times. Call and web chat times dramatically reduced nearly immediately. Wait times have consistently been below 5 minutes. Additionally, we expanded in-person hours and additional customer service representatives. Importantly, the call volume today is less than half of the call volume at the February launch of the customer assistance plan. That being said, additional customer service representatives will also be available should the end of the plan prompt an uptick in call or web chat volumes. The second element of the plan waives civil penalties upon payment of an unpaid video toll that escalated and a civil penalty assessed. Reinforce what I said before, from the start of the plan, February 24th, 2022 through October 31st, 2022, MDTA has waived civil penalties totaling 108 million, a result of nearly 700,000 customers paying their previously unpaid video tolls. The third element of the plan paused any collection escalation efforts. More specifically, vehicle registration holds and suspensions and referral to the state central collections unit. The MDTA has not referred any accounts to MVA and CCU since February 2022. In essence, the customer assistance plan has acted as a temporary payment plan to all customers with unpaid tolls for them to spread payments out over 9 months. However, many customers did not take advantage of the opportunity. The final element of the plan involved advancing payment plans opportunities. MDTA continues to work to advance payment plan opportunities, thanks in part to the board's July approval of the COMAR changes. Now I'm going to turn it over to Will to talk about the steps we've taken to advise customers about the plan.
Thanks, Deb. And again, good morning, Chair and members of the Finance Committee. As Deb stated, the customer assistance plan has brought many benefits to our customers, like vastly reducing our wait times, waiving millions in civil penalties, and advancing future potential payment plans. With the lower call volumes and increased staffing, customers can easily reach us now. Many customers have already reached out to us to resolve their tolling needs, to make those toll payments that Deb talked about. And tens of thousands of video toll customers has switched over to an EasyPass account to receive lower toll rates and no longer have the hassle that comes with opting to receive video tolls. As noted in your briefing materials, the MDTA has taken every step possible to alert our customers to the impending November 30th deadline of the customer assistance plan. We directly requested the entire General Assembly and county and local elected officials to remind their constituents. We sent written requests and verbally asked these elected officials to help us at all of the CTP meetings. And I want to take a moment to thank each of the elected officials that have participated in this, like Senators Jason Galen and Katie Fry Hester, delegates Bob Long, Eric Ebershaw, Nick Kipke, Lisa Bellestro, Sid Saab, and Steve Arentz. Our Baltimore County Councilman Julian Jones, and Anne Arundel Councilwoman Lisa Rodvane, our Cecil County and Frederick County governments, and again, all the elected officials who are helping us take proactive steps to assist their constituents with these reminders. We've also reached out to customers directly with buck slips in each of their notices. We've sent direct reminder mailers, including certified mailers to customers with large volumes of notices. And all of our MDTA sites and social media include various reminders and alerts to the deadline and the plan features. We provided several e-blasts throughout the EasyPass customer network, reminding them to check and pay any video tolls they may have incurred. And that's because video tolls are recorded separately from their EasyPass accounts. If an EasyPass customer had any period with insufficient funds, or they're essentially have a negative EasyPass account, we've encouraged them to check their license plates for video tolls on the Find My Tolls page link from the Drive Easy MD website. We've also had considerable TV, radio, and written earned media, as well as we've paid advertisements on these same platforms and have paid for billboards directly adjacent to our facilities. As Deb noted, we've had good participation with this program. In fact, we expect that when the plan ends at the end of this month, the participation levels will be very close to the projections that we had provided back in February. Unfortunately, however, there are numerous customers who have not paid anything to date. The 9-month period to pay was essentially squandered by these customers. We never want customers to receive civil penalties or to need to apply more stringent enforcement measures. However, we provided in your briefing package, we provided 2 examples where customers acknowledge on social media that they've received our notices and are plainly refusing to pay their tolls. This is exactly why our standard operations include civil penalties, suspensions, and collections measures. And these standard operations are necessary to maintain fairness with our customers who follow the law and pay their tolls, and so that we, the MDTA, can comply with our trust agreement and not have free passage. And so for this reason, we do plan to close the originally approved customer assistance plan per the board's original approval on that November 30th date, and we'll resume our standard operations on December 1st. And so with that, I will open it up for any questions that members may have from either Deb or I. And one last point, we will, when the program does close, we will come back and provide additional details. We obviously are still tallying things here. We'll provide additional details next month after the plan closes.
Well, I just want to comment real quick if I can. I think that all along, you know, I think we're customer focused, and I also think that at every turn we have taken the steps to reach out to customers, you know, through many different channels. And along the way, I think that you've been very transparent. You have kept the board informed, others informed, and I commend you for the way this has been managed. But at the end of the day, it just seems that whether it's business or whether it's in tolling, we do need some leverage to collect what is rightfully due. And but I do commend you and the team for keeping us informed, listening to our comments, and making some changes along the way. And thank you for that. And thank you, your team as well.
Well, do we know if the legislative outreach has prompted action by the legislators to reach out to their constituents? Or
Yeah, the list of legislators that I thanked earlier, like Senator Jason Galen, they have put out notices and used the information that we provided to share with their constituents. We provided that same information to all of the General Assembly and county and local municipal elected officials. Some have elected to share that, some have not. You know, you can lead a horse to water, you can't make them drink, kind of thing. We've done everything that we can, and we do anticipate providing a 2-week reminder as well, and trying one more time to get on some TV and radio to provide that last minute push. And we'll share that information again with elected officials, just continuing to ask them for their help in reminding constituents. But yes, many have shared that, and we thank them for their efforts, and look forward to others joining in on that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the update. Appreciate it. Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item number 11, the Investment Committee report. Alan Garman.
Great, thank you.
How are you?
Great. How are you today? We have our normal team, Clayton, and also our external advisor, David Calvert of PFM, that will help me in the presentation. So this is our normal quarterly update on investment strategy and performance. We'll provide a market update, review the portfolio composition and compliance, and also discuss strategy and total return performance. The key points that will be reviewed in the slides are that the diversified investment portfolio remains in compliance with the policy and the trust agreement. Our matched funded accounts are benefiting from higher prevailing rates for short-term instruments, and our longer-term reserves that have total return strategies. The systematic rate rise is impacting all bond market investors in the form of mark-to-market price declines. Despite the short-term return volatility associated with the rising rate environment, the strategies for these long-term reserve accounts should remain consistent. The multi-year returns for the long-term reserves align with our financial forecast and approximate the starting rolling yields, though the short-term returns are negative. With that, I will turn it to David Calvert of PFM to review the next slide on our market update.
Thank you, Alan. This is Dave Calvert. Okay. In regards to 2022, I'm getting an echo. Okay.
I will mute. Thank you.
Okay. The focus in 2022 has been on the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is trying to combat inflation. Inflation is, in fact, at the highest levels that we've seen in 40 years. On slide number 3, you can see core PCE index is up 5.1% year over year. The Federal Reserve would like to see that number at 2%. So there's a considerable way to go. If you have stock market alerts, you're seeing the stock market rise quite dramatically this morning because the consumer price index was released at 8:30 this morning and was actually better than expected, meaning that inflation was running slower than what some feared, and we're seeing 3 to 4% increases in the stock market. So because the dual mandate of the Federal Reserve is to have full unemployment as well as having price stability, they've actually achieved the former. In fact, the unemployment rate as of September 2022 was 3.5%. So far, year to date, there were 4 million jobs that were created. This is on top of the 6.2 million jobs that were added last year. And because of this, the Federal Reserve has been quite aggressive on raising rates. In fact, the federal funds target rate has increased by 375 basis points. This is the largest increase by the Federal Reserve in a single year, going back almost 50 years. So it's a very historic and anomaly year compared to what we've seen generally in the bond market. I'll turn it back over to Alan and Clayton.
Okay, thank you. One other point on this slide is that the graph in the bottom right shows returns and yields since last June. And if you look at the blue line, you'll note the sharp rise in Treasury yields, particularly around the Fed hikes that started in March. And then the orange line illustrates the negative total return for a bond index. And that's really incorporating the mark to market, with bond prices falling as those yields rise. And we have a few more slides to illustrate that later in the presentation. I will turn it over to Clayton for the next few slides.
Thank you, Alan and David. I hope you can hear me fine. And again, this is Clayton Viewig, the investment administrator for the agency. Moving on to slide 4, we show a pie chart which demonstrates the diversification of the portfolios, both match funded and total return. For requirements, we do remain well diversified with a significant weight in the agency space. As we look at slide 5, we note that the maturity distribution tends to the very short end, the 0 to 1 year bucket, and this is primarily made up or constituted of the match funded accounts. Those agency, or that big agency weight that we saw on slide 4 is housed primarily in the match funded accounts. Moving on to slide 6, we show a little bit additional detail for the total return accounts, separating the match funded and the total return accounts. And here we combine the maturity distribution for both the general and the M&O accounts. That reserve is typically around plus or minus $350 million. And you'll see that we're invested anywhere from the very short term out to 15 years for those 2 accounts. Are there any questions? Moving on to slide 7 or slide 7 and 8, we show the compliance for the portfolios. As you'll note on the right up at the top, we remain in compliance with respect to maturity situation. And over on the far right, you'll see that we remain in compliance both on pages 7 and 8 with respect to our allocations to the various sectors and subsectors. Moving on to slide 9, we did want to make sure that we shared an appreciation for the exposures in the portfolios to match funded versus total return accounts. As Alan had mentioned, the backup in rates has been less impactful on the match funded accounts since we are very short term and focused on meeting liabilities or the spending of the agency. I will turn it over to Alan for slide 10 and 11.
Great. On slide 10, it shows the various accounts, how they're managed. And we have 2 general strategies, either a matched funding approach or a total return approach. So more than half of the portfolio is invested on a match funding basis. And that's essentially with investment maturities matched to their projected spending. So those are our monies in the capital construction accounts, as well as our operating account and our debt service funding accounts. And that strategy is really just purely driven by cash flow needs. And that's outlined in the policy and the trust agreement in terms of directives and limitations for those monies. The investment returns in those accounts are just a function of prevailing rates, particularly for short-term instruments. I'd note that money market yields have risen rapidly, from less than 1% to approximately 3.5%. 3 to 6 month T-bills are currently around 4%. The second strategy is for our long-term reserves that do not have any associated cash flows. They're managed for total return. The general account has staggered investment maturities from out to 5 years. And the M&O reserve is our smallest reserve account, and it has staggered maturities out to 15 years. These longer duration portfolios and the benchmarks that we use to compare performance, they benefit from higher average annual returns when you view them over multi-year periods, but they experience much greater return volatility associated with mark-to-market relative to a shorter term portfolio or index. The investment committee recommends that the strategies for these long-term reserve accounts remain consistent, and that's despite the short-term return volatility associated with the rising rate environment. If we turn to slide 11 now, the charts help to explain why longer-term strategies are chosen. The top chart shows generally higher yields for longer-term indices, and it's comparing our two benchmarks, and they have durations of near 3 and 7. The bottom chart illustrates the greater return volatility for the longer index relative to the shorter index. So you can see that higher average annual returns over multi-year periods, but you have much greater return volatility. Our match funding accounts represent unrestricted cash reserves mandated by our debt policy. Our stable duration targets are held generally regardless of bond market conditions. We're not trying to time the market. The benchmarks are approved by the board based on our risk tolerance to remain within our financial policies and achieve reasonable multi-year returns. Turning to slide 12, this chart illustrates the key measure of portfolio or index yield or cash flow income. The beginning of period portfolio yield is a good proxy for understanding the cash flow or horizon income for the portfolio. If you think about the weighted average portfolio yield or the index yield, it's an annualized return measure for the bond's cash flows to maturity. And I'd focus you in on the blue line. It shows a beginning of period yield of about 90 basis points or 0.9%, and that was at the beginning of this year. The orange line shows the average coupon at the beginning of the year as well, and you can see that's a bit higher than the yield, so that means that the portfolio and the index held premium coupon structures, and that was prevailing in the market. But the yield again is the cash flows to maturity, and it's netting the coupons and premium amortization. And then the two more confusing lines, the gray line, shows the sharply rising market yields, and then the yellow line shows the negative monthly total returns. So the change in market yields alters the market value of those cash flows, but it doesn't change the cash flows themselves. So really the focus for the investment committee is on multi-year expected returns, and they should approximate our beginning of period rolling yields. So really that's the blue line. Prevailing yields at the beginning of period approximate your expected return in those portfolios over multi-year periods. So I'll turn it back to Clayton for the final slide 13.
So on slide 13, we do show the performance of the portfolios, both the match funded and the combined total return, general and M&O. You'll notice that match funded accounts, returns for these have moved up during the course of the year as interest rates have moved up. Again, being very short term, they're participating almost immediately in these increases in interest rates. See that, although there are a few mark-to-market issues with shorter time periods. And the general and M&O, again, we're experiencing some volatility, but those returns are in line with what we would expect given our longer term investment horizon. There on the bar chart on the bottom right, We've broken out the returns for the general its index, the STB1, as well as M&O its index, the STB7. And you'll notice, I guess the major takeaway is they're performing in line with expectations, and expectations are in line or a little bit better than respective index. With that, if there are no further questions, I think they're done.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Blake, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, at this point, the investment committee is requesting the finance committee's concurrence and recommendation to move to the full board for approval of the continuation of investment strategy and benchmarks.
Okay, thank you. Certainly, it seems like, we're from the beginning, I guess the strategy is being in it for the long haul, and as was said, I guess not playing the market, staying the course. Is that's where we are, right? Is that what everyone, all of our advisors and everyone is saying at this point?
Yes, that's the recommendation of the investment committee and the external advisor, to maintain a consistent investment strategy and not try to time the market.
Okay. I guess we will, there are not any questions right at this point. We'll ask for a motion to advance this to the full board for consideration.
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Member Rosen. Is there a
Member
second?
Artinger.
Member Artinger?
Second.
Thank you, Member Artinger. We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all who participated, David, Clayton, and Alan. Thank you very much. We will, and Deb, we will move on to agenda item number 12. First quarter budget comparison. And Jeffrey Brown, you are up again, sir.
Hi again. This is Jeffrey Brown, Budget Director for the MDTA, and I'm here to provide our usual quarterly update for the first quarter budget versus actual performance for fiscal year 2023. As of September 30th, 2022, we have spent 11% of the budget when compared to a target of 23%. All objects are at or below the targeted spending levels. There are three primary drivers: personnel vacancies, seasonality of expenses, and first quarter accruals. The last two, the seasonality and the first quarter accruals, especially the seasonality, you'll hear that quite a bit through this presentation. Not unusual for the first quarter. Typically, expenses do not come in smoothly, even though, against the budget, so you will have some timing issues. So you'll hear that a lot. But I will note where those areas where there might be a budget issue otherwise. Moving forward, the salaries and wages, objects 1 and 2, are below budget at a 19% spend. As just mentioned, employee vacancies drive this performance. Communications, objects 3, is at a 7% spend. This is driven really by objects 0305, state paid telecommunications, which is 0%. This line contains the state radio system invoice, which has yet to occur. So when that does, we expect this to come back closer to budget. Object 4, travel, is below budget at 13% spend. Again, this is typically a little lumpy. We don't anticipate being off of budget full year at this point. Fuel and utilities, object 6, is below budget at 10%. Typically, this expense is heavier in the winter months. and specifically on electricity, 620 is below budget at 9%, but we do expect this to increase with the opening of the Nice Middleton Bridge. And we do expect some catch up and some delayed billing. So we do expect this to come back towards budget. Motor vehicle and operations, object 7 is below budget at 14%. And this is dependent upon when the vehicle orders are actually filled. And at this point, we don't anticipate being off of budget. Contractual services, object 8 is below budget at a negative 2% spend. The main driver on this is accruals, which I will be talking to later. But moving into some more detail, both advertising and engineering are below spend at 1% and 3% respectively. Again, this is timing of invoices and really billing timing. We don't anticipate being off of budget. Equipment repairs and maintenance, 0809 is at 91% spend. This is the flip side of the timing. In this case, we have a IT storage and blade service maintenance billing, which has hit, and that occurs once a year. So this is not unusual, and we don't expect this to be over budget. We expect this to be on budget. Building repairs and maintenance, 08112 is below at a 9% spend. Again, we do expect this to come back to budget. Janitorial services, 813 is over budget with a 31% spend. This is both billing delays and some fiscal year 22 bills, which are being paid in fiscal year 23. This has the potential to be a budget impact. It's too early to tell, but we are getting some billing from prior years that we did not anticipate. Education and training, 819 is below budget at 4%. These expenses, as you've heard before, don't come in evenly. Typically, things like tuition reimbursement occurs at semester end, so those things will come in at different times in the year, and at this point, we don't expect this to be off of budget. Management studies, 821 is below budget with a 5% spend. We do have some studies getting ready to occur and be an invoice. Again, this is timing. We do expect this to come back to that budget. Primarily IT objects, which is 841 through 869, are collectively at 16%, which is within range of the budget, and we don't see any issues and expect this to be beyond budget long term. Easy Pass Service Center costs is minus 27%. At the end of fiscal year 22, we do accruals for expected expenses, and those get reversed in the first quarter. The actual expenses have not yet been paid, which is why you have this large credit. We do expect this to come back to budget over the long term. And then other contractual services, same idea. There was a payment delay due to an invoice coding error. This will be coming back towards budget. Supply and materials, object 9 is at 13%. Roadway maintenance materials and salt, both of those are highly seasonal. We do expect those to come back to budget, especially salt. Ammunition is 61%. Again, the flip side to the timing, we had an annual TASER contract payment, which has occurred once a year. So that's why that is so high to budget, although there are some partial shipments of some back ordered ammunition, and we'll have to keep an eye on whether that does cause a budget impact. Easy Pass transponders are at 10%, but are expected on budget. Replacement equipment is at 21%. You can see both replacement equipment and other replacement equipment. They're both timing. On one end, we expect some more orders to come in, and that will get back to budget. On the other, the 1099, we're at 63%, and we had the PPE equipment already hit, and that should be done, so we don't expect this to be over budget. Additional equipment's at 7%. Again, the main driver is 1113. But we do expect that to be on budget due to timing. And finally, object 13 is at a 1% spend. This is driven by insurance, which is a one-time invoice of $4.5 million that has yet to occur. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take any questions at this
Okay. Doesn't seem to be any questions. Thank you very much, Jeffrey, for the update.
Thank you.
Okay. We will move on to agenda item number 13, another update here on first quarter budget comparisons. Jeannie Marriott. Hi, Jeannie.
Hi. I'm here to update the Finance Committee on the status of actual fiscal year 23 capital spending against the fiscal year 23 capital budget in the fiscal year 23 to 28 draft CTP. And this information will also be presented to the full board on November 17th. As of September 30th, 11.9% of the fiscal year 23 budget was spent as compared to the targeted spending level of 25%. The total budget for fiscal year 23 is $556 million. The actual spending through the first quarter was $65.9 million. And the first quarter percentage is low because there are outstanding accruals for work completed in fiscal year 22. 82 of the 91 projects budgeted in fiscal year 23 were within the acceptable spending limits of 0 to 50%. Due to normal lags in invoicing, generally 2 months, a plus or minus 25% threshold was determined to be reasonable. Actual spending through the first quarter for 10 projects budgeted for more than $11 million each in fiscal year 23 was $51.6 million. And we can look at attachment A to see the 10 projects that were budgeted over $11 million in the draft CTP. Largest is the Nice Middleton Bridge. Then we have altogether 4 of the ETL northbound extension projects. Then there's also a Bay Bridge project, another Kennedy Highway project, FMT vent fans, and then we have 2 projects that are considered multi-area because they apply to to all the facilities. So the budget for those was $369 million. And the actual through September 30th was 51.6 million. That puts these projects at a 14% spend rate, and there's $317.4 million left to spend to reach 100%. Any questions?
Appears not. So is there any other questions, just to confirm? We're good? Okay. Jeannie, thank you. Okay, we will move on to agenda item 14, another update. Quarterly update on traffic and revenue. Deb Sharpless. Deb.
Thank you. So in your materials, so we're back on cycle where we're doing quarterly traffic and revenue updates. And what we've done now, moving forward, is we've merged together in a single item the analysis that staff performs, as well as a quarterly report that we received from CDM Smith. As we talked about earlier, when we did the traffic and revenue forecast update, we work very closely together and compare notes and both had the same understanding as to what is occurring on our roadways, which helps all of us have better forecasts and align with what our expectations are. So starting in your memo, underneath the summary section, that area is referencing some figures in the CDM Smith quarterly report. And so one of the things that I want to start off with is under the analysis. And so if we compare traffic or transactions and revenue to the first quarter of 21, then we are we're down a 500,000 transactions, or 1.3%. And then from a revenue perspective, we would have increased by 5.4 million, or 2.7%. That's some of the composition of traffic that we talked about earlier with having higher commercial traffic. So now if we look at FY23 compared to our forecast for the first quarter, from a transaction basis, we are 1.2 million ahead, and 14.5 million ahead on a revenue. But however, I got to put a big caveat, is we have a timing difference here. So the forecast assumes a certain lag in processing transactions, and we are ahead of where the assumption is in the forecast. So when we adjust for that timing difference, we're ahead by 4.3 million transactions. And you'll see that in the work that we're going to present in just one second in the attachments. So I'm on page 3, and the table that you're familiar with labeled attachment A, you can see the 14.5 million where we're ahead unadjusted, but then we have $10 million of timing difference. Last year, whenever we talked about timing differences, it was always where we assumed something was going to be completed in the forecast, but it hadn't occurred yet. This timing difference is the opposite. We've processed more than what was assumed in the forecast. So it's the reverse. And so when we go down to attachment B, what makes up that? The first one has to do with Easy Pass, transponder read transactions. We call them AVIs. We're 6 days ahead of processing. And then we're 1 day behind on I-tolls. And then on the video toll side, we've mailed 1.1 million more transactions than what we had pre-forecasted. And that's the reason why we go from the nearly 15 to a real number when you account for timing is 4.2 million. So for a first quarter, that's a good start. It's too early, certainly to predict the end of the year, but we're starting out the quarter, on a positive foot. On attachment C, we get into more details as to why, why are we ahead? When you adjust for timing differences, what's causing it? And, we've got some offsetting items here. First, we've got some transactions that weren't forecasted. Then we have some higher average revenue days. And then we have some offset with video toll and CCU collections being lower than forecasted. And on a net basis, we're 4 million ahead of forecast. The CDM Smith report that's included, I won't walk through that. It provides similar information with regard to the 14 million. It just doesn't account for the timing difference, but in greater detail. So happy to answer any questions.
It is always good to start off first quarter on a good note, right? As you said. So
Deb, in the attachment C, the 11.5 million, that's video toll and central collection unit collection rate lower than forecasted.
Yes.
So what is that?
So what that means is when we have assumptions as to at certain points in time in the collection process, a certain amount of revenue is collected. So, basically like our collection rate. And so as of this report, the end of September, our actual collection rate is lower than what had been forecasted. People are paying slower.
Got it. Thank you.
any other questions? Okay. Deb, thank you again for this report. And we have addressed all 14 items on the agenda today. There's a lot of information presented, and behind those 14 agenda items is a lot of work from all those behind the scenes and those who participated in this meeting this morning. So I know I could speak for the other board members here. It's very much appreciated. There's a lot of work that goes behind this, and but thank you everyone for that, and also thank the board members for their participation. They're very engaged, ask good questions, and all in an effort. I think all of us are trying to. One goal is to do the best we can for the good of MDTA, and I see that everywhere. So anyway, I want to thank all of you for participating. I guess at that point, we will seek a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion? Member Ardinger?
I'll move to adjourn.
Okay, thank you. Member Carroll? I think you were on mute.
Sorry, second.
And Member Carroll, second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. We stand adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
See everybody.
Thanks. Have a great Veterans Day weekend. Thank you.
You too.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Safe travels and enjoyable trip for you, Member Ardinger.
Oh, thank you. Bye,
Take care.
everybody.
Take care.